I'm quite a pragmatic person, okay. I'm going to talk about thermochemical conversion of biomass for sustainable aviation fuel. And that is not at all what I do all day in, day out, but I've chosen this so I can narrow it down, so I can actually get the numbers together more easily to see that there really is a dilemma between sustaining our economical way, because the economy works in a certain way, and that is through growth, right? And there's a particular sector in this economy, which is the aviation transport sector, which is really called short, because it depends on liquid hydrocarbons whether it wants to or not. So just to put it into context, we all know we live in a carbon-constrained environment. There's pressures growing on the government to do something about carbon pollution, but we're also hitting peak oil, whether we are already there or whether we're going to shortly, doesn't really matter all that much. What I think our biggest problem is the unprecedented population growth and dealing with that, okay, in the long term. We are also in that regard, through climate change, we are seeing some changes in weather conditions and rainfall in particular. Now that will affect agriculture, it will affect freshwater supplies. So yeah, well, I guess mankind is in the doghouse at the moment. So all of that, we know if things are scarce and not guaranteed and supplies are unstable, that is not good for political stability. It typically leads to war. And if we look back at the French Revolution, that's precisely what happened. Mankind had outgrown the resources, and ultimately there were squabbles and squabbles over what was remaining. So I think we have a biological solution that can help us a bit out of this dilemma. I'm not saying it's a miracle cure, but we know that the microbes, I know my little critters, okay, they're my pets. I've worked with them for 30 years, I know them by name, and I know their character. Some play nicely, others don't. But the ones we can play with are really productive on non-Arab land, so there is no food versus oil competition. And particular, this talk is focused on the aviation industry. Okay, students in this room, if you're in engineering and science, if you're studying bioengineering or biotechnology, you've done a fantastic choice, because that's where the future has to lie. Now, I'm not going to look at this in great detail, so this is only really to pretty it up, and for some people who want the numbers. But the transportation sector in general, it doesn't actually contribute all that much to the greenhouse gas pollution, okay? So that's not really the concern. What is a concern is, for example, here the aviation industry, it's only contributing with 2 to 3%, which is only about 650 million tons of carbon dioxide, okay? But the growth or predicted growth of the aviation sector is what's really causing this dilemma, okay? It's predicted to grow by 5 years every year up to 2050, and it's going to carry, instead of 2 billion passengers, it will carry 16 billion. The aviation industry has long recognized this, and the aviation industry, as an industry, I can only congratulate them. They really want to do something about this, okay? They have invested, could do with it, they have pretty much done. They have come up with new designs and new materials which improved or reduced the greenhouse gas emissions by 82%. That is fantastic, okay? They could have a little bit more optimization potential in terms of making airports a bit smarter in terms of the airport transport management. However, that's all not going to help to offset the costs, okay? And 30% of the operating costs are actually in fuel. The airlines or the industry has committed that it wants carbon neutral growth by 2020, and I don't want to say it, but they're pushing things uphill, okay? And ultimately, they really want to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 50% below 2005 levels. So they really need help to achieve that. So here are the reality predictions when you look at commercial flights only, and we're not including the military here, which doesn't want to be named in many cases anyway. Okay, so you have 2.3 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions by 2050, and that is following IPCC storylines. So technology advancement is significant, plays a significant role in CO2 abatement, but it's certainly not the only one. Now, I don't really have to explain this picture, but this is my introduction to the biological part. And what you see here is when you're using fossil fuels, okay, for whatever, you're actually unleashing long locked-in carbon into the atmosphere. That is what we call pollution. If you look at this one here, you can see that you're using smart organisms, okay? They use sunlight and CO2 to make their own environment, so they're making their own carbon, organic carbon out of CO2 and sunlight, okay? And then if we are smart, we can exploit that to release or unlock short-term carbon, which then has got this cradle to the grave scenario, which I think might help us. So this is just to show you that things are really starting to get fairly tight, okay? This is not going to be a scenario like it was 50 years ago, where the oil industry all of a sudden reboomed and recovered and everything was hunky-dory and all the money for funding ceased subsequently. Okay, these are all the new initiatives that were formed specifically to deal with how to get renewable and sustainable fuels into the aviation industry. And the great example here is our little neighbor country, New Zealand, okay? And New Zealand is in it, Boeing is in it, Qantas is in it, and Virgin Blue are in it, okay? So they're all discussing what can we do, because one thing they have decided, the industry has decided it has to be sustainable, it has to be renewable, and it cannot compete with water or food, okay? So Cyril said, and that's the most valuable sentence out of the whole brochure, is bio-derived fuels are the only sustainable alternative for jet fuels. So that is where we need to look. Now, here I'm showing you a very boring table, but what this table actually says is it can be done, okay? Bio-derived fuels can actually meet the very, very stringent quality parameters of jet fuel, okay? So there are only two highlighted in yellow that have used algae at all in their mix, algal oil, okay? So very scarce on the algae, which are my little critters, but they have used things like Eutropha and Camelina were the main ones. This GTL in grey is gas to liquid, okay? That is actually not a renewable or sustainable way of doing it, so I've taken it out. So what you can also see is that the engines, only one engine was driven with biofuel, and that was in most instances, in all the instances, it was only a blend, so it was not a 100% biofuel, okay? But you can see all the players here, you know, the airlines and the partners, and here is where it all comes together. If we want to make this happen for an industry, then you need more than biologists, okay? You need engineers, you need chemical engineers, you need mechanical engineers, you need and you need excellent IT people, because communication is crucial in this. So So here is the jet fuel standard, and that is what we have to meet. Okay, I'm not going through it. I believe the PowerPoints may be available as a PDF afterwards. So you can see I've put in, because I'm a child by heart, I've put in little green aeroplanes for everything that we have demonstrated we can do. Okay? So here is where I think the real crux lies, and that is the sustainability and also the carbon neutrality and the water solution. And I know that I said in my abstract I would do a life cycle or techno-economical analysis, and I tried that, and I tried it, and I tried it very hard. And then I decided, geez, there's not enough data to even try it. So I didn't, because I couldn't, right? So we have to really give it a go and get the data in order to model anything. There's just not enough there. So here is the scenario as to what you can do in terms of conversion pathways. Okay, and this is a very classical approach here, where you do a traditional extraction, you get your oil, you do a train esterification, and you get biodiesel. Okay, that biodiesel could be refined to jet fuel. Now, our latest paper on algal biodiesel, microalgal biodiesel, through this route, it's ruled out. It's not techno-economical feasible. No matter, you can have the highest rich oil algae you might want, it's still not going to be economically feasible. Okay, and then you have other pathways here for micro and macroalgae, where you do some dewatering, you use something like supercritical water as the solvent, or you could do fast pyrolysis, gasification, gas, Fischer-Tropsch. Now that all rings bells, right? This is not new. This was already proposed by, forgot it now, but by Shell engineers, actually, you know, a long time ago in the 80s. So it's not new. But what excites me about it is it can be done. That is the exciting bit. Now, whether it's going to be energy suitable and whether it's going to be water-wise, that remains to be seen. One thing I really, really don't like is fast pyrolysis in this connection. Fast pyrolysis when mentioning algae. Algae are aquatic organisms, okay? Even the densest culture, you only have 1% of your microorganisms, you're dealing with 99% water. And that's not even intracellular, okay? And moving water around and trying to get rid of water is one of the most expensive exercises, energetically, that we can think of. So, what I do get quite excited about is the supercritical water, okay? Because for aquatic organisms, using water as a solvent, now that's clever, okay? And I'm not going into the rest down here, which are lignocellulosic pathways, but don't forget, we might have to mix and match, because one thing can't do it all. So, I'm not going to go into any detail here, but from the previous table of where we had done biojet fuels, these are the endorsed pathways, okay? The HEPA pathway, which is the hydroprocessing of natural oils and fats. So basically you have extracted the oil and then you do a hydrogen treatment, so you get rid of the oxygen, you make the biofuel more stable. And the BTL, biomass to liquid, through the Fischer-Tropsch conversion, okay? Now Fischer-Tropsch has always been stated it's not energy feasible, but I really don't know whether there's enough out there. What is exciting again is that British Airways and Solena, okay, here are two industry partners, one that wants to fly on biofuel and sustainable biofuel, and the other one who wants to make a profit out of it, right? Selling the technology. What's the better driver than economics? So I'm not going to talk about this other than, there are some new conversion technologies on the horizon. Pyrolysis I would call upon in terms of lignocellulose conversions and stuff like that, not necessarily for the algae. But this ethanol conversion pathway that Virgin Atlantic and LanzaTech are looking into also looks somewhat interesting. So, to summarize briefly, we have conversion pathways that we know will do the trick, right? They will deliver biofuels that suit. We know that even for pyrolysis, based on previous LCA analyses, okay, 68 to 77% of greenhouse gas emissions can be saved, even through that pathway. I don't know how true that is today, but the question has to be, so if we can do it all, what's limiting? And why aren't we doing it? Huh? The industry wants it, we can do it, and we're not doing it. Well, the hurdle is that we don't have guaranteed supplies. We cannot guarantee the quantity or quality of what we're providing, okay? And if you want to build an industry on something like empty promises, that's like a marriage, okay? It's gonna fall apart. It's not gonna work. So there are also some environmental issues that we really should be addressing on a research and development basis before we roll out an industry and then say, oh, whoops, sorry, we didn't consider this or that, right? So I just wanted to put it into context here for you. Here are the world's largest airports, and you can see that they're all kind of aggregating in areas with high population densities. You can see the world's oil reserves or fossil fuel reserves here in the circles. And just out of fun, I did an overlay with camelina. Okay. Now camelina looks very small, and it has got kind of a distribution across the temperate belt. Now here are my little critters, the algae. Now the good thing about the algae is they really can be grown on non-arable land. That means in countries with low population densities and tropical to subtropical. Here is the distribution for Jatropha. Jatropha has similar promise, so it would grow in regions where population densities are low. Now this is important, guys, because if we really want to reach the scale of fuel production that we need to reach, we have to consider land use, right? We need to build the industry where we can grow sufficient and not interfere with anything else. Okay, so no one has really thought about this. And here we have something called the oil palm waste. Okay, now this is my little case example that I want to build on. Okay, it's situated in Malaysia. Okay, and I want to use it as an example as to what you can do later. So I'm going to skip this one other than to say camelina has been proven as a source for biojet, so is Jatropha. These are two new players and no, they're not really proven. Now this is my project that I'm leading. So here we're taking actually problematic wastehouse gases and nutrient-rich or metal-rich wastewaters from industries, and we're growing these bugs, okay? Now, the algae are photosynthetic organisms. They use sunlight, CO2, and create organic carbon. The N2-fixing cyanobacteria do exactly the same as the algae do, except they evolved 4.6 billion years ago, and we're the architects of today's atmosphere. And then the methanotrophs are the ones that actually convert methane to carbon dioxide. And in Australia, we have a lot of landfills, we have a lot of underground coal mines, there are large CO2 methane emitters. Okay, if we want to rescue precisely like you would handle fire plants or macroalgae, so you can physically handle them, you don't need the hugely expensive dewatering technology, okay? And not the energy either. And we have already achieved bioconcentration factors well over 200. 284 was our best one, but I've calculated, I'm using a biofactor of 100 for a calculation example, okay? So I'm going to skip this is all. So what about the energy balance? Well, the energy balance with our system here actually looks very, very good, because we don't have to take the 1% of algae out of 99% of water, right? So, and this biofilm can go straight into a hydrothermal liquefaction process. Now this is data from Cyro, and it just shows that even the worst performing microalgae still outperform other sources of biomass for fuel. Now this slide is important because I'm kind of getting sick to this about people not giving credit, okay? Now in the 1980s, okay, the Shell Laboratory had an R&D project running, and they actually invented the hydrothermal liquefaction, okay? We call it these days supercritical water, okay? And their hydrothermal liquefaction unit actually operated subcritical, which is important, okay? So they also did a techno-economical evaluation of this HTL process, and it all turned out really good in the 1990s, okay? Yeah, a lot of energy products that can be derived from it through this process, and 70% of the biomass can be converted into energy biofood. What you have to take into account is water is good, right? In all other conversion technologies that rely on dry input, water is bad. And this is why it's important. Here is Malaysia. Malaysia has 5 million hectares under palm oil. Okay, the rainforest is gone, pretty much, or large parts of it. But we are only using a small amount of the biomass. The rest is waste. What a waste, right? It goes up in the air. They don't know what to do with it. It's waste, right? So, why not put one and one together? Because this waste is so high in water, it has 60% water content, that hydrothermal liquefaction would be perfect for it, right? Why not make at least a low-grade fuel before doing nothing with it, right? So let's see whether we can actually make Southeast Asia the Arabia of tomorrow. And this is where I think we can fit in, okay? We can have, because Malaysia is right on our doorstep, we can have the biomass from the palm, HTL, okay? Sorry, this doesn't really show. Then product separation, you get flue gas, the algae grow on it, right? You get wastewater, both use it. And then you can do a demineralization, you get anaerobic fermentation, you get biogas. Now the methanotrophs love that. And so you get more biomass choices, and that is something I thought about in terms of sustainability. Okay, we have the palm oil plantations, but sooner or later I think we're either going to switch to Fischer-Tropsch fuels or something, and then the palm oil plantations, you know, who's going to look after them ultimately, right? But adding into the mix brand new sources of carbon, you know, I think will cut the balance, and I hope it will keep the aviation industry flying. Australia depends on it. Thank you. Not to forget my team.